Hello, this is the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast, and I'm your host, Nate Goss. It is Monday, March 23rd. We're about 2 days now into the state's stay-at-home order to stop the spread of the coronavirus in the state of Illinois. And so I'm working from home. Luckily, I have some recording equipment at my home, so I am able to put out new episodes of this podcast. We'll see what that looks like and how long we're in this situation. So much is up in the air right now. We just don't know. But I had this episode in the can before any of the talk of even having the library closed or staying at home or working from home or, even talks of how long this was going to be had even happened. It was just a podcast about celebrating Women's History Month for the month of March. And I started editing it so I could put it up. And, everything from before this time just has a different tone to it now. And so it didn't feel right to just put it up without at least talking about the situation that we're in right now, acknowledging the situation that we're in, and that a lot of us just aren't thinking about things the same way now that we were even just a week or two ago. So I just wanted to do that, to acknowledge that this is going on. But I want to keep putting out episodes of things that would maybe, give you something to listen to, give you something to get your mind off of things, or maybe put out some episodes that are helpful to people during this time. I don't know. I don't know what this podcast will look like in the days and weeks to come. But for right now, I just wanted to share with you this episode that we had recorded, and I hope you enjoy it, and maybe it'll just take your mind off of things for a little bit. It's a great episode with our local history librarian, Jenny Barry, and so I'm going to go ahead and get to it. But I hope everyone is staying safe out there. I hope everyone is doing things to take care of yourself, whether that's physically, but also mentally, spiritually, however you want to take that. I hope everyone's just doing whatever they can to stay a little sane during this time. So stay safe and enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to the Cook Memorial Public Library podcast. I'm your host, Nate Goss. Believe it or not, it is already the month of March, which means it is also Women's History Month. Last year for Women's History Month, our local history librarian, Jennifer Barry, highlighted 3 extraordinary women from Libertyville, and now this year, she's back on the podcast to talk about another woman whose decades worth of work in Libertyville has helped shape the town into what it is today. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Jenny, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks, Nate. Glad to be here.
So can you just introduce our listeners to the woman that we're going to be discussing today, and maybe, why are we selecting this?
Sure. All right. Well, today we're going to be talking about Dr. Norma Munson. She came to my attention when the library received a call of a friend of hers who had a volume of the International Who's Who's of Intellectuals that was stamped with Dr. Munson's name on the front. So she had an entry in the book. So
before you go on further, for those of who maybe aren't as familiar with what that even is, what's a Who's Who's book? I mean, do we still have those even? Or
they do make them now. Okay. I'm not sure that the library actually collects them.
Okay.
Before the days of the internet, the reference collection would have at least Who's Who in America in it, if not other Who's Who's books. And they generally have profiles of people in a certain area. It could be politicians, it could be scientists, it could be businessmen, depending on the Who's Who book. Mm-hmm. Generally, you are asked if you would like to be in the book. And you can choose to be in it. Sometimes you have to pay to be in the book. I'm not sure in this particular case what the criteria was for the International Who's Who of Intellectuals, but there is a large entry for Dr. Munson in this particular book.
Okay. Yeah, sorry I interrupted you
okay.
though.
So anyway, the library did not end up taking the book itself. The high school library did, but we were able to get a copy of the entry, so we knew a little bit about Dr. Munson. Well, it turned out we already here at the library in our local history file had a file for Dr. Munson, and we have very few women in our history file. So I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Who is this woman who was in Libertyville and actually taught at the high school for a number of years and is in the Who's Who of Intellectuals?
So the Who's Who she was in was Intellectuals then?
That's the one that was in question that came to us at the library. She was also in the Who's Who's of a lot of other things, too.
Okay, so it was the Who's Who's book that got you interested in this person, saw the file clipping and everything. So why don't we just maybe start from the beginning? Why don't you just tell us a little bit of an overview of who Dr. Norma Munson was?
All right, will do. Well, she was born in 1923 near Stockport, Iowa, to Glenn and Frances Munson, who were farmers. She was the second child of 5. There were 4 girls and a boy, so a good-sized family. They moved to Baudette, Minnesota, which is on the Minnesota-Canada border, in 1930 and continued farming there. So she attended Baudette High School, and then after that she attended Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, graduating in 1946. She then went and taught in some high schools. So she taught biology and chemistry at Atkin High School, which is 2 hours north of Minneapolis, and Detroit Lakes High School, which you think might be in Michigan, but is actually in Minnesota.
Really?
Yeah, I looked them up. 3.5 hours northwest of Minneapolis. But I guess she must have decided to go back to school to learn more. So she completed a master's from the University of Missouri in 1955 in zoology, and then she came to Libertyville to teach. Now, she was quoted in a newspaper article saying that she had just was coming for 1 year. Famous last words.
Yeah.
She wasn't exactly overjoyed at the first year, but she decided to try 1 more year, and then apparently became hung up on the teaching thing. So she would end up teaching at Libertyville High School from 1955 to 1957, taking a break for more education, and then returning and teaching through 1979.
So she already had the master's in zoology before she came and taught at Libertyville High School. I wonder what it was that brought her here.
Well, there's some indication, and some of the articles are a little bit confusing on when she decided to go to medical school and then how she stopped going to medical school and came to teaching.
Okay.
So there was mention that she had studied medicine for 1.5 years and then decided to do teaching as a full-time career. One of the articles said that she actually changed her mind when she found out that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. She was quoted saying, "You think of how many people who are disturbed and not helped. And it was at that time I felt I would be a teacher."
So it's maybe more of a vocational kind of thing of I want to help people.
I think so.
In the high school I can help these young people.
Right,
yeah.
Right. Apparently she had wanted to be a doctor from a young age, and she said, "From the age of 6, I'd set my goals. I bandaged every animal that looked sick." And her first major medical accomplishment was setting a colt's broken leg when she was a sophomore in high school. Apparently the colt otherwise would have been put down, and she was able to save it.
Wow.
In another article, she said that she had wanted to be a plastic surgeon to help give scarred and deformed people a second chance. So it sounds like, regardless of exactly what direction she went, that she really wanted to be a person that helped others. While at Libertyville High School, she had a large hand in the development of the AP college-level biology course. And she included a lot of individual research, which apparently was a keynote of her classes. It sounded like she really held her students to a high standard.
Yeah. So any AP Bio listeners right now, you have Dr. Norma Munson to thank.
Exactly. I'm sure the other biology teachers at the time had a little hand in it, but she was definitely...
Well, for the sake of the podcast.
Exactly.
It was all her.
She was all her. It was all Dr. Munson. She would open her biology lab at 7 each morning, and a lot of students would come in before school to get help. Her coworkers remembered her as having a thirst for knowledge her entire life that she instilled in her students, and that she was determined, fair, and caring. And she also worked with the LHS Adult Night School, the National Honor Society, Future Teachers, and the biology clubs.
Wow.
So she seemed to give a lot of her time.
It sounds like in a lot of different ways as well. Investing in the students, but also being on all these different groups and leading all these different movements and things within the field.
Right, and not just in the high school. So she did get involved in the community, the Libertyville community as well. In 1970, she helped start the Save Butler Lake group. At the time, the lake was decaying and filling up with silt. She actually got her students involved, which I think is really a great idea. She assigned forest edge projects to analyze the wildlife and nature along the shore and wooded area. So we don't really think about it very often, but having a lake right by your high school is kind of a neat opportunity for your students to get out into the field right behind the high school. So the students observed flora and fauna, they plotted shoreline and depths of the lake, and they actually went out and paddled in canoes to take the depth of the lake in different spots.
Very cool.
I'm sure there'd be insurance issues today, but but what a neat idea. It just sounds so neat to me to get the students involved in this right in their backyard.
Yeah, well, and you're not your typical idea of school, you know, just getting out there and actually doing the science.
Exactly. In her life, she was also in the Lake County Audubon Society. She served several terms as president, and she was an elder at the First Presbyterian Church. So she had a lot of different interests. And she was rewarded. So now I'm just going to start a big list.
All right. Listeners, take notes.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So she was 1971 Illinois Biology Teacher of the Year, 1974 Illinois Teacher of the Year. She won the Hilda Malling Fellowship in 1967, which gave her a grant to study the possibility of correlation between low sugar content in the blood and the behavior of pupils. We'll talk a little bit more about her interest in nutrition in just a minute.
Okay.
She was a National Science Fellow in 1957, 1958, 1960, 1961, and 1962. She was a Chicago Heart Association Fellow in 1959, and she was included in many Who's Who publications beyond the one that we talked about earlier. So I just touched on her nutrition work, but it really wasn't just a side interest for her. So while she was teaching at the high school, she continued to study, and she took classes at over 30 universities and traveled around the world to learn more about anything she wanted to learn about. She said, after getting my degree, I decided to get an education in nutrition.
Just for the heck of it.
Why not? She actually had several experiments relating to diet to improve school or work performance behavior, and she published 2 articles on the topic. She did try to instill good nutritional habits with her students. So she would start out the year trying to tell them about the importance of eating right. She said, you plant seeds and you hope they germinate. But she counseled people outside of school, adults, with dietary problems, and that started about 1965. Sometimes with her school hours and her nutritional counseling, she was working up to 17 hours a day.
Wow.
And many of the clients she worked with had degenerative diseases, and she hoped to give people hope where other doctors had given up. So she would work out a diet for the people, and she said it's just primarily body chemistry we're working on. And she also quoted saying, the optimum diet always gives the optimum weight. It's the proportions, not what you eat, that count. I think weight gain is one of the most serious diseases in the United States. And now this is in the 1970s that she's being quoted as doing that. And I think of all the weight loss programs that are out there today. And a lot of them, that's exactly what they're talking about. They're talking about portions, control and all of that.
They give you little specific containers of certain sizes to help you with your portions.
Exactly. Yeah. And here she is 40 plus years ago saying that this is what you should be paying attention to.
Right.
I don't know if she was ahead of her time because I don't know much about the dieting, of 1970s, but I just feel like she might have been. So she did actually have to resign from Libertyville High School. She had become allergic to formaldehyde. Which I guess as a biology teacher would, kind of limit your exposure, limit what you could do in the classroom with your frogs and all of that.
Yeah, that's too bad. Yeah. I wonder how you develop an allergic to formaldehyde over time.
I took a quick look at it today on the internet. I didn't pay real close attention to it, but it seemed to be just exposure, continued exposure to it. So really, after she retired, nutrition was her focus, and she continued to counsel people from her home. I mean, I think one of the nicest things in her obituary is that she was a dedicated educator who continued her studies so that she could deliver the very best and latest to her students. So she just seemed like someone who was really into self-improvement and helping others to improve themselves as well.
Do you have any feelings as you were sort of researching Dr. Norma Munson? Was it inspiring to you personally at all?
Yeah, I just felt like she was always going above and beyond, and that maybe she didn't think that she was going above and beyond. I don't think she was striving to prove herself to other people as much as just go out there and learn.
Right.
And be able to transfer that knowledge to other people. And especially to be working in a high school situation and not, she could have taught at college. She could have been a researcher somewhere, and instead she decided to spend her time with Libertyville's youth, and I just think that's really great.
It's really admirable, and I feel like two characteristics that are so obvious as you research her, basically this love of just lifelong learning and curiosity, and then just wanting to help people, and just combining those two things, the countless people's lives you can touch with those two things put together,
Right. It'd be really interesting to hear if any of our listeners had her as a teacher and what their response was to her and their memories of her.
That would be great. Yeah. If any listeners, if the name rings a bell, let us know. That would be awesome to hear about. All right. Well, Jenny, I just want to thank you so much for bringing Dr. Norma Munson to our attention, really. It's a great way to celebrate Women's History Month at a super kind of local level, and look at someone who actually touched a lot of different areas of Libertyville history.
You're welcome. I enjoy doing Women's History Month every year.
Okay, so if you are interested in getting into other aspects of our local history, a good first step is just to check out the local history page on our website. That website is cooklib.org. Head over to the research section and you'll find a link to that page. While you're on our website, consider making a quick detour to our blog, Shelf Life. That's where we regularly blog about books that we're reading, along with local history stories, genealogy tips, different news about new services at the library, and a whole lot more. That blog can be found at shelflife.cooklib.org. If you ever want to reach out and give us some feedback, if you have a question or comment or anything about this podcast, you can talk to us anytime. You can talk to us on Twitter. Our handle is @CookLibrary, or send us an email. Send those messages to webmaster@cooklib.org. And if you do enjoy this podcast, especially if you enjoyed this episode, please tell others in your life about it and let them know that they can listen to this episode along with any past or future Cook Memorial Public Library podcast episodes in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or really wherever they like to get their podcasts. We will be back soon, but until then, keep reading, keep watching, and keep listening.